The desert sun was harsh that morning, spilling golden light over the dusty forward operating base in Afghanistan. Inside the compound, soldiers moved with purpose, some cleaning their gear, others preparing for patrol. The air smelled of gun oil, sweat, and sand. Commander Jack Reynolds, a man who had seen more than 15 years of war, walked through the area with his usual sharp eyes. He noticed everything: who was alert, who was tired, and who didn't belong. As he passed the sniper section, something caught his attention. In a corner of the armory, sitting quietly at a wooden bench, was someone he hadn't seen before, a woman. She wasn't chatting, not checking her phone, not even looking around. She was focused on the heavy rifle in front of her, a Barrett .50 caliber, the kind of weapon that could reach targets over 2 miles away. Reynolds slowed his pace. He had seen many soldiers handle weapons, but this was different. The way she moved was precise, almost graceful. She worked like she had done it 1,000 times before. Her hands were steady, her breathing calm, her attention fixed completely on the weapon. She wasn't cleaning it just for inspection. She was treating it with respect, like a musician polishing an instrument before a concert. For a moment, Reynolds just watched. The base around him buzzed with noise, engines rumbling, radios crackling, boots scraping the gravel. But this one corner seemed quiet, almost peaceful. He walked closer. "New here?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. The woman looked up briefly. Her eyes were sharp, calm, and unreadable. "Just attached for a while, sir," she said simply, then went back to her task. Her answer was short, respectful, but distant. She didn't sound nervous, and she didn't try to explain herself. Reynolds noticed the small Marine Corps patch on her uniform sleeve, Sergeant E. Torres. A Marine sniper working with a SEAL team wasn't common, but it happened on joint missions. Still, something about her made him curious. Most newcomers tried to make a good impression. They smiled, introduced themselves, tried to blend in. She didn't. She acted like she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Reynolds studied the rifle. It was spotless, every part carefully cleaned and laid out in order. He saw how she checked the bolt and reassembled the weapon without even looking up. She knew it by heart. He respected that kind of discipline. He tried again. "You must like that rifle," he said with a half-smile. She gave a tiny nod. "It does the job," she replied, her voice quiet but firm. Something about that answer made him pause. Not "I love it," not "it's powerful," not even "it's my weapon." Just, "It does the job." The words sounded simple, but they carried weight. As Reynolds walked away, he felt something he hadn't felt in a while. Curiosity. Who was she, really? He had led some of the best shooters in the world, but this woman didn't fit the usual mold. She had the calm confidence of someone who didn't need attention. Later that day, while reviewing mission plans, his second-in-command walked in. "Sir, you met the new sniper yet?" Reynolds nodded. "Torres, right? Quiet one." His deputy smirked. "Yeah, that's her. Heard she's got some record or something. Don't know the details, but the guys in Intel were talking. Said she did something crazy in Kunar a few years back." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Kunar? You mean the valley where that long-range hit was reported?" "Maybe," the deputy said. "Could be her. Could be a story. You know how legends spread." Reynolds chuckled and shook his head. "Yeah, every base has its ghost stories." But the thought stayed with him. A 3,000-meter shot was nearly impossible, beyond what most snipers would even attempt. It required perfect conditions, perfect calculations, and nerves of steel. The shot was famous among special forces, but no name had ever been officially confirmed. That evening, he passed by the armory again. Torres was still there, finishing up her rifle maintenance. The sun had dropped low, painting everything in orange light. She was alone, quiet, methodical. Not distracted, not tired, just steady. He watched her for a moment longer. There was something almost peaceful in the way she worked, but beneath that peace was something powerful, a hidden intensity. He thought about how many soldiers he had trained, how many had broken under pressure. But she looked like someone who didn't break. He finally said, half to himself, "You handle that rifle like it's part of you." This time, she looked up again, a small hint of a smile on her lips. After a while, she said softly, "It kind of is." Reynolds didn't say anything else. He just nodded and walked away, but in his mind, the image stayed. That quiet Marine sniper, cleaning a weapon built for legends, sitting in the corner like she belonged to another world entirely. He didn't know yet who she really was. He didn't know what she had done or what kind of story followed her here. But something inside him whispered that this woman, Sergeant Elena Torres, wasn't just another soldier passing through. He had seen many warriors, but very few who carried silence like a shield. And as the night settled over the base, Reynolds found himself wondering, what kind of person could carry a weapon that heavy, stay that calm, and still look so at peace? He didn't have the answer yet, but soon he would. The next morning, the base woke up early. The sound of helicopters echoed in the distance, and the smell of instant coffee mixed with dust filled the air. Commander Reynolds was already up, reviewing mission maps when he saw Sergeant Elena Torres again. She was standing near the shooting range, her Barrett .50 resting on a tripod, sunlight flashing off its long barrel. She wasn't talking to anyone. She wasn't showing off. She was just adjusting her scope, slow and careful, like every movement had meaning. Her calmness stood out in a place where noise was constant and patience was rare. Reynolds watched her for a while. He noticed how she didn't rush a single step. She checked the wind direction, made a small note in her book, looked through the scope, and waited. Then, without hesitation, she fired. The sound of the Barrett was thunderous, echoing across the desert. A cloud of dust lifted in the distance where the target stood, and when the spotter checked, her shot was dead center. The few soldiers nearby exchanged looks. "Damn," one of them muttered under his breath. "She's good." But Torres didn't smile or react. She just unloaded the rifle, brushed away a bit of sand, and quietly said, "Ready for the next." To anyone watching, she seemed like a machine, calm, focused, unemotional. But Reynolds saw something deeper. It wasn't coldness. It was control. He'd seen too many snipers lose that. Men who became too eager, too proud, or too shaken by what they'd done. Torres wasn't like that. She carried herself like someone who'd already seen too much and learned to live with it. Later that day, while the team took a short break in the mess hall, the younger SEALs couldn't stop whispering about her. "She doesn't talk much, huh?" one said. "She doesn't need to," another replied. "You saw that shot?" Someone joked. "I bet she could hit a coin at a mile." Torres walked in just then, carrying her tray, quiet as always. The conversation died instantly. She sat at a corner table alone and started eating. Not avoiding people, just not interested in the noise. She looked like she belonged somewhere else. Somewhere quieter, somewhere where the only sound was the wind. Reynolds sat across the room, watching her with curiosity. Most soldiers wanted attention, some even chased respect. But Torres didn't seem to want either. She moved through the base like a shadow, polite, calm, invisible. After lunch, Reynolds decided to learn more. He called over his intelligence officer, a young man named Diaz. "What do we have on Sergeant Torres?" he asked. Diaz scrolled through his tablet. "Marine Scout Sniper, 1st Division. Served 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. Highly decorated, though most of her records classified. She's been attached to several special units for Overwatch support. 0 disciplinary issues. Anything unusual?" Reynolds asked. Diaz hesitated. "Only that she's got no public mention of her confirmed kills. But her evaluations call her exceptional under extreme pressure. And, sir, her spotter from the Kunar operation, he didn't make it back." Reynolds went quiet. He knew what that meant. Losing a spotter was like losing a part of yourself. Snipers and their spotters trusted each other with their lives. If she'd lost hers, it explained the silence in her eyes. That evening, as the sun went down, Reynolds found her sitting outside the barracks, cleaning her rifle again. The same methodical movements, the same steady rhythm. He decided to sit nearby. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft click of metal and the distant hum of generators. Finally, Reynolds said, "You don't talk much, do you?" She looked up for a moment, then said, "Talking doesn't make the shot better." He smiled slightly. "True, but it helps people know who's covering their back." She gave a small nod and went back to her work. They'll know when it counts. It wasn't arrogance. It was confidence, pure, quiet confidence. Reynolds found himself respecting her more with every word she didn't say. He remembered something one of his instructors once told him. The most dangerous people on the battlefield are the quiet ones. They don't brag. They just act. That night, when Torres finally packed away her Barrett, she glanced at Reynolds and said, "We head out tomorrow, right?" "Yes," he replied. "Mountain sector. You'll be on overwatch." She nodded. "Copy that." Then she stood up, slung her rifle over her shoulder, and walked off into the dim light, calm, steady, unshaken. Reynolds watched her go, feeling something shift inside him. She reminded him of the soldiers who carried invisible stories, the ones who didn't talk about what they'd done, but whose actions spoke louder than any medal or speech. When she disappeared into the barracks, he whispered to himself, "Quiet professionals, the kind that keep us alive." He didn't know the full truth yet, the history behind her silence, the reason she never boasted about her kills, or the weight she carried. But he knew one thing for certain. Sergeant Elena Torres wasn't just a good sniper. She was something rare, a soldier whose calm could steady an entire unit. And as the base went dark under the Afghan sky, Commander Reynolds realized that sometimes, the most powerful people in war are the ones who don't make any noise at all. It was just after midnight when the camp finally grew quiet. Most soldiers were asleep, some were cleaning their weapons, and a few were playing cards under a dim yellow light. Commander Reynolds sat in the command tent, reading mission updates. The desert wind blew softly, carrying the smell of dust and diesel. Everything seemed calm, until he heard a few voices outside. He stepped out and saw 3 younger SEALs sitting near the vehicle bay, whispering like schoolboys trading secrets. When they noticed him, they quickly straightened up, but he caught a few words: Torres, record, and longest shot. Reynolds crossed his arms. "Something you boys want to share with the class?" he asked in his usual calm tone. The youngest one, a radio operator named Harris, scratched his neck. Nothing, sir. Just talking about that Marine sniper, Sergeant Torres." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "What about her?" Harris hesitated, looking at his teammates. Finally, one of them spoke up. "Sir, have you heard the story? They say she made the longest confirmed sniper kill in history. Over 3,000 meters. Kunar Valley. 2 years ago." Reynolds frowned. He had heard that story, a single sniper taking out an enemy commander from nearly 2 miles away. It was legendary among special forces, but no one ever knew who had done it. The details were classified. "Who told you that?" Reynolds asked. "Some guys from the intel unit," Harris said quickly. "Said her files mostly sealed, but it lines up. Same year, same place. They think she's the one." Reynolds didn't reply. He simply nodded and walked away, but the thought stayed in his mind. Could it really be her? That quiet woman who barely spoke a full sentence? The next morning, during breakfast, he watched Torres sitting at her usual corner table, eating silently, her short dark hair pulled back neatly. She looked like any other soldier, calm, ordinary, disciplined. Nothing about her screamed legend. But the whispers had started. Everywhere she went, people turned to look. Some nodded with quiet respect. Others stared in disbelief. A few even seemed nervous. Soldiers respected snipers, but they also feared them. The idea of someone who could take a life from nearly 2 miles away was something beyond normal understanding. When one of the new recruits tried to talk to her, asking if the rumors were true, she didn't even look up. She just said, "Don't believe everything you hear," and continued eating. That made the rumors grow even faster. Silence, after all, is its own kind of answer. Later that day, Reynolds called her into his office. She stood at attention, her rifle slung across her back. "At ease, Sergeant," he said. "I've been hearing stories about you." Torres looked calm. Yes, sir. He studied her face. It gave away nothing. No pride, no guilt, no irritation. Just patience. They say you were in Kunar Valley, he continued. That you made an impossible shot. For a few seconds, she said nothing. Then she answered quietly, We were there. My spotter and I. Reynolds leaned forward. And the shot. She met his eyes. It was necessary. The target was leading an ambush on our unit. We were outnumbered. We had one chance. He watched her closely. There was no bragging in her voice, no emotion. Just simple fact. Like she was talking about the weather. 3,347 meters? He asked. She nodded once. Approximate. I didn't measure it. The round took 9 seconds to reach. Reynolds exhaled slowly. He'd been in combat long enough to understand what that meant. The kind of focus, calculation, and nerve it took to pull that trigger and wait 9 seconds to know if you lived or died. He asked softly, Your spotter, he didn't make it back, did he? Torres's eyes dropped for the first time. No, sir. He was hit during extraction. There was a silence between them. It wasn't the awkward kind. It was heavy, full of respect and pain that needed no words. After a moment, she added, People call it a record, but for me it was just a job I had to finish. Someone had to protect the team. I just happened to be in position. Reynolds nodded slowly. He could tell she wasn't lying, and she wasn't proud either. She carried that shot like a burden, not a trophy. When she left the tent, he sat there for a while, thinking about how war creates legends out of people who never wanted to be one. That evening, he saw how the men treated her differently. They respected her space now. When she passed, conversations paused for a second. Not out of fear, but admiration. They started calling her the ghost sniper. But Torres didn't seem to care. She still ate alone. Still cleaned her rifle every night. Still spoke only when necessary. Once, Harris approached her again, trying to make friendly conversation. So it's true then? You really made that shot? He asked eagerly. Torres looked at him for a long second, then said softly, Truth doesn't change what's done. Focus on your own job, soldier. Her words weren't harsh, but they carried weight. Harris nodded quickly and backed away. As the days passed, the whispers turned into quiet respect. The men knew now that she wasn't just another sniper. She was a living legend walking among them, carrying a story that most people only read about in books. And yet, what impressed Commander Reynolds the most wasn't the record or the fame. It was how normal she seemed despite it all. Calm, patient, disciplined, and human. She didn't act like a hero. She acted like a soldier doing her duty. That night, as he looked across the base and saw her silhouette sitting alone with her rifle under the starlit sky, Reynolds thought to himself, She's not chasing glory. She's carrying ghosts. He realized then that the whispered stories didn't make her powerful. It was her silence that did. The morning was quiet, colder than usual. A thin fog hung over the camp, softening the sharp lines of the tents and the sound of boots on gravel. Commander Reynolds was sipping bitter instant coffee outside his office when he saw Sergeant Torres again. She was sitting by herself, her Barrett rifle laid open in front of her, wiping the barrel with a small cloth. The same calm, steady hands, the same silence. He walked over and stopped a few steps away. You always this focused? He asked with a half smile. She didn't look up. Rifles don't clean themselves, sir. He chuckled lightly. True. But I think yours might be cleaner than the general's office. She gave a small smile, the kind that lasted half a second. Then silence returned. Reynolds hesitated for a moment, then sat down on an empty ammo crate across from her. I read your file, he said quietly. Not much in it, but enough to know you've been through more than most. She nodded, still wiping the rifle. That's war, sir. Everyone's been through something. Reynolds looked at her carefully. You know, the boys talk about you. That shot in Kunar Valley. I asked around, couldn't find anyone who'd confirm it. But they all say it was you. For a long moment, she didn't move. Her hands froze mid-wipe. The silence stretched between them. Finally, she set the cloth down and looked up. Her eyes were calm, but there was something behind them, a quiet sadness, maybe even pain. "It was a long time ago," she said softly. Reynolds didn't push. "What really happened out there?" She sighed quietly, as if she'd been waiting for someone to ask, but also wishing no one ever would. "We were on overwatch," she began. "Kunar Valley. High ground. My spotter, Corporal Jensen, and I were covering a convoy route below. The enemy had been setting ambushes for weeks. Command thought they'd try again." She paused, her voice low and steady. "It started just after dawn. We saw movement, a small group of fighters moving across the ridgeline opposite us. We called it in, but before support could arrive, more of them appeared. Maybe 30. They were setting up mortars." Reynolds leaned forward, listening closely. "One man stood out," she continued. "Binoculars, radio, giving orders. We knew right away he was the commander. If he finished setting those mortars, our convoy would be wiped out." The rangefinder showed 3,347 meters. Too far for most rifles, even for the Barrett. It was pushing limits. The air was thin, wind light but shifting. It wasn't an easy shot. She looked down for a moment, her voice dropping. "Jensen thought it was impossible," he said. "We wait for air support." But there wasn't time. The mortars were almost ready. I told him to start calculating. Her tone stayed calm, but Reynolds could hear the memory behind every word. "We adjusted for wind, humidity, elevation, even Coriolis effect, the Earth's rotation. I knew it would take almost 9 seconds for the bullet to reach. If I missed, they'd know our position, and we'd be dead before we could move." She took a slow breath. "When I lined up the shot, everything went quiet. The wind stopped. Even my heartbeat felt like it slowed down. Jensen was whispering range numbers, and I could hear his breathing tremble. I squeezed the trigger." She looked up, her voice steady but distant. 9 seconds later, the man dropped, straight down. The rest of them panicked. Some ran, some fired blindly. We held our position until support arrived. They confirmed the kill later. The ambush never happened. Reynolds didn't speak. He could almost see the scene. The mountain wind, the impossible distance, the calm heartbeat behind the scope. Torres continued quietly. "It was just one shot. People talk about it like it was something heroic. But it wasn't. It was math, timing, and luck. Nothing more." He shook his head slowly. "It was more than luck, Sergeant. That was skill, the kind you can't teach." She gave a faint smile, but her eyes stayed heavy. "Maybe, but skill doesn't bring Jensen back. He was hit during extraction. A stray round caught him while we were pulling out. He didn't even get to hear that the shot made it." Reynolds swallowed hard. The way she said it, calm, matter of fact, made it hit even deeper. It wasn't just a record to her. It was a memory carved in silence. She picked up the rifle again, checking the scope like it helped her keep her thoughts together. "That's why I don't talk about it," she said. "People hear numbers, records, glory. I just remember the wind and the sound of his voice calling the range." Reynolds nodded slowly. "I understand." For a few minutes they sat in silence. The sun had climbed higher now, burning off the fog. The base came to life around them. Voices, engines, distant laughter. But in that small corner, everything felt still. Finally, Reynolds said quietly, "You know, most soldiers spend their whole careers chasing a story like that. You did it, and you treat it like a burden." Torres shrugged lightly. "Stories don't win wars, sir. People do. And people die for them." He couldn't argue with that. When she stood to leave, she paused and looked back at him. "If anyone asks," she said softly, "tell them the shot was made by the wind." Then she walked away, her rifle slung across her shoulder, her figure fading into the bright morning light. Reynolds sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had been. He finally understood why she was so quiet, so controlled. It wasn't pride that kept her silent. It was respect. Respect for the man who'd been beside her, and for the life she'd taken that day, even if it saved dozens of others. And as he watched her disappear into the crowd of soldiers, he thought, legends don't talk. They just remember. The mountains of Kunar Valley were cold that morning. the kind of cold that bit into your fingers even through gloves. The sun was still hiding behind the peaks, and a thin layer of mist hung over the valley floor. Sergeant Elena Torres lay flat on her stomach on a rocky ridge, her face half covered by a scarf, her eyes locked through the scope of her Barrett .50. Beside her was Corporal Jensen, her spotter and closest friend in the unit. They had been in position since before dawn. Hours of silence. Only the wind spoke. Every few minutes, Jensen whispered coordinates, adjusting the spotting scope while Torres watched the distant road below. The valley was quiet, too quiet. "Anything?" she asked softly. "Nothing yet," Jensen replied. "But intel says they'll move today. They know the convoy's coming." Torres nodded slightly. Her trigger finger rested lightly on the side of the rifle, not on the trigger. She had learned long ago that patience saved more lives than bullets. Minutes turned into an hour. The wind shifted slow, then stronger. She adjusted the scope half a click, then waited again. Then Jensen's voice broke the silence. "Movement. 11 o'clock. Ridge across from us." She turned the scope slightly and saw them. Small dark figures moving through the rocks, carrying weapons, setting something up. She adjusted focus and saw the metal tubes, mortars. "Got them," she said quietly. Jensen checked his rangefinder. 3,347 meters, he said in disbelief. "That's too far, Torres." She didn't answer. She was already doing calculations in her head: wind drift, elevation angle, humidity, even the Earth's rotation. The Barrett could reach, but not easily. At that distance, even a breath could shift the shot by meters. Then she saw him, the leader, standing tall, binoculars in one hand, radio in the other, giving directions to his men. He was calm, confident. She knew instantly, if he finished setting those mortars, their convoy would be dead before the trucks even saw the ambush. "We don't have time to call for air support," she said. "They'll be in range in 2 minutes." Jensen looked at her, uneasy. "Elena, that shot's impossible." She adjusted her cheek rest, her voice steady. "Not impossible, just unforgiving." He swallowed hard, then started reading wind speeds. Wind at 2 meters per second, shifting from west to northwest. Temperature drop, slight. Torres adjusted the scope again. The reticle floated gently over the distant figure. Her heart slowed. Her breathing matched the rhythm she trained for years to master. In through the nose, out through the mouth, steady. "Elevation 14.3 mils, Jensen whispered. "Confirmed," she said. The world around her seemed to vanish. The cold, the noise, even time itself. All that existed now was her, the rifle, and the target 2 miles away. Jensen's voice came one last time. "Ready," Torres whispered. "Send it." Her finger squeezed the trigger. The Barrett thundered. The recoil pushed back hard into her shoulder, echoing through the mountain air like an explosion. A puff of dust rose around her, then silence again. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then came the longest 9 seconds of her life. The bullet traveled through thin air, cutting across wind and gravity, spinning faster than sound. Jensen held his breath, counting softly. 5, 6, 7. Then, through the scope, they saw it. The man on the opposite ridge dropped instantly. No movement. The radio fell from his hand. "Hit confirmed?" Jensen whispered, disbelief in his voice. The enemy fighters froze. Panic spread through their ranks. Some ran, others fired wildly into the empty air. They had no idea where the shot came from. Torres didn't move. She just exhaled slowly and chambered another round. "Target down," she said calmly. Jensen grinned, shaking his head. "You just broke history, Torres. 3,300 meters. That's insane." But she didn't smile. She just stared through the scope, watching the chaos unfold below. "Get ready to move," she said. "They'll try to find us." Minutes later, the radio crackled. Their team had received confirmation. The convoy was safe. The ambush had collapsed before it even began. Command's voice came through. "Outstanding work, Sniper Team Delta. Extraction inbound." Jensen laughed softly. You realize they'll be talking about this shot for years, right? Torres didn't answer. She just kept watching through her scope, expression unreadable. When the extraction team arrived, the shooting had stopped. They began to pack up. Torres disassembled the Barrett with careful hands, while Jensen covered their rear. Then it happened, a single distant crack of a rifle. A bullet hissed through the air, and Jensen stumbled. "Jensen!" she shouted, dropping beside him. Blood bloomed on his chest. She pressed her hands against the wound, her voice trembling for the first time all day. "Stay with me. You're okay." He smiled weakly, his voice barely a whisper. "Worth it, wasn't it?" Then his eyes went still. The world went silent. The wind returned, colder now, cruel. She sat there beside him for a long time, the rifle beside her, the mission complete, but everything else broken. When the helicopter finally arrived, she didn't speak. She just carried her gear, climbed aboard, and looked once more at the valley below. Somewhere down there lay the spot where history was made, and where she lost her friend. She never spoke about it again. The record was written in reports, shared among soldiers as a story of precision and bravery. But for Torres, it was a memory marked not by pride, but by loss. As the helicopter flew away, she closed her eyes, feeling the vibration of the rotors through her chest. Jensen's last words echoed in her head. "Worth it, wasn't it?" She didn't know the answer. Maybe it had saved lives. Maybe it had cost her more than anyone would ever understand. But one thing she knew for sure, she would never take another shot without remembering that moment, that silence, and the friend who called the last range of his life. The next few days moved slowly. The desert heat returned, the kind that made the air shimmer like water and turned every breath into dry fire. Commander Reynolds went on with his usual duties, checking patrol reports, inspecting vehicles, coordinating operations, but in the back of his mind he kept thinking about Sergeant Torres. Ever since she told him the truth about the shot, he looked at her differently. Not as a Marine sniper or an attached unit, but as someone who carried the kind of quiet strength most soldiers only dreamed of. He didn't tell anyone what she had confessed. It wasn't his story to share. That week, the SEAL team had a new mission, a high-risk extraction. A group of Afghan informants were trapped in a small village surrounded by insurgents. The terrain was brutal. Steep cliffs, rocky paths, and long open stretches with no cover. It was the kind of mission that could go wrong in a heartbeat. Reynolds called his team for briefing. Everyone sat around the table, maps spread out, red markers circling danger zones. Torres stood near the back, her rifle case resting against the wall. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice unless asked. Reynolds pointed to the top of the map. "We'll insert here, move down through the valley, and reach the target house before dawn. Overwatch will be from this ridge." He looked at her. "That'll be you, Sergeant." She nodded once. "Understood." The team moved out before sunrise. The air was still cold, the sky deep blue fading into gold. As they hiked through the narrow paths, Reynolds could hear the crunch of boots behind him and the faint clatter of Torres adjusting her gear. She carried the heavy Barrett like it weighed nothing. When they reached the ridge, she stayed behind with her spotter drone operator, while the rest of the team descended toward the village below. Her job was clear: protect them from above, cover their exit, and if anything went wrong, stop it before it started. The first part went smoothly. The SEALs reached the village quietly, found the informants, and began moving them out. But then, just as they reached the open road, gunfire erupted from the hills. Bullets cracked through the air. "Contact! Northwest Ridge!" someone shouted through the radio. Reynolds ducked behind a low wall, heart pounding. "Torres, you see them?" Her calm voice came through the radio. "Copy. Multiple targets. 3 with AKs, 1 with RPG. Marking coordinates." Reynolds peeked over the wall. He could see nothing but dust and rocks. Then, before he could respond, a deep, thunderous sound echoed across the valley. The Barrett's report. Boom. One shot. Silence. Then another. Boom. Reynolds watched through his binoculars. Each shot was perfect. Every time she fired, one enemy fell. There was no panic in her voice, no rush, just calm, measured commands. Target 1 down. Target 2 repositioning. Adjusting wind, she said softly through the radio. Her tone was steady, almost soothing, like someone reading a weather report instead of engaging in combat. RPG on the left, one of the SEALs shouted. Reynolds barely had time to look before the Barrett fired again. The man with the launcher dropped before he could even aim. Within minutes, the gunfire stopped completely. The valley grew quiet again, except for the soft hum of the drone overhead. Reynolds exhaled, gripping his radio. Good shooting, Sergeant. You just saved us a lot of trouble. Her voice came back, calm as ever. Just doing my job, sir. They completed the extraction and headed back up the ridge. When they reached her position, she was already cleaning the rifle, the barrel still warm. The empty shell casings lay in a neat line beside her. Reynolds stopped beside her and looked at the view. Wide mountains, endless sky, and the smoke trail of where the fight had been. You didn't even break a sweat, he said. She smiled faintly. There wasn't time for that. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. You know, most people would have panicked down there. That kind of calm under fire. It's rare. She shrugged slightly. You focus on the job. Panic gets you killed. He nodded, understanding every word. That's when he realized she wasn't just skilled. She was disciplined in a way few soldiers were. No ego, no fear, just focus. That night, back at the base, Reynolds gathered the team. They sat around sharing stories and jokes, passing time before lights out. Torres sat a few steps away, cleaning her rifle again. The men kept glancing at her, not out of curiosity this time, but out of quiet respect. Harris, the youngest, finally said, "Ma'am, I just want to say, thank you. You saved us out there." Torres looked up, surprised for a moment, then gave a small nod. You saved yourselves. I just made sure you could. They all laughed softly. For the first time, she almost looked relaxed. Not as the mysterious sniper they'd whispered about, but as one of them. After everyone left, Reynolds stayed behind. He sat next to her on a wooden crate. You know, he said, you remind me of an old saying, the best warriors are the ones who never want to fight. Torres smiled faintly. Maybe that's true, but sometimes fighting is the only way to stop more fighting. He looked at her, truly impressed. You ever think about teaching? Training new snipers? She shook her head. Not yet. Maybe one day. Right now, I'm still learning from every shot I take. Reynolds chuckled. You might be the only person alive who calls that kind of shooting a learning experience. She didn't respond. She just looked out at the night sky. Quiet, endless, peaceful. In that moment, Reynolds realized something important. Respect couldn't be demanded. It had to be earned, through discipline, courage, and humility. And Torres had earned it more than anyone he'd ever met. When he finally stood to leave, he said, "Good work today, Sergeant." She replied softly, "It's not work, sir. It's responsibility." Reynolds walked away, her words echoing in his head. Responsibility, that was what drove her, what kept her calm, what made her deadly when it mattered. He understood now why people called her the Ghost. Not because she was unseen, but because she carried the weight of those who didn't make it back, and still showed up every single day. It was late evening when the base finally went quiet. The sun had already dipped behind the mountains, and the camp lights threw long shadows across the ground. The mission had ended hours ago, but sleep didn't come easy after a day like that. Most of the team had gone to their bunks, some writing letters, some just staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. Commander Reynolds, however, couldn't sleep. He stepped out of his tent and walked slowly toward the armory. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint smell of dust and oil. He could hear faint metallic clicks coming from inside, the familiar rhythm of someone cleaning a weapon. When he pushed open the door, he wasn't surprised to see Sergeant Elena Torres sitting alone at the long wooden table. The Barrett .50 lay disassembled in front of her, its parts lined up neatly, shining under the dim yellow light. She didn't look up when he entered. Her hands moved with steady precision, wiping, checking, adjusting. Every movement had purpose, no wasted motion. Reynolds watched quietly for a moment. There was something almost hypnotic about the way she worked. He'd seen soldiers clean rifles before. Fast, careless, sometimes angry. But Torres treated the Barrett like it was something sacred. He took a slow step closer. "You ever stop working, Sergeant?" he asked with a small smile. Without looking up, she replied, "Can't sleep if the weapon isn't clean." Her tone wasn't cold, just matter of fact. Reynolds sat on the bench across from her. "You know, most people out there think of that rifle as just a machine. You treat it like a living thing." Torres finally looked up, her dark eyes calm. "It's not alive, sir. But it decides who stays alive. That deserves respect." He nodded, letting her words sink in. He could see in her face that she wasn't just talking about metal and bullets. She was talking about responsibility, about the weight of each shot. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft click of the cleaning rod sliding through the long barrel. Reynolds finally broke the silence. "You know, when I first saw you with that rifle, I didn't believe the stories. I thought maybe someone exaggerated. But after today," he paused, searching for the right words. "I've been in the field for 15 years. I've seen a lot, but I've never seen control like that. You make the impossible look routine." She gave a faint, almost shy smile. "Control is just the part you can see. What you don't see is the cost." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He leaned forward. "You mean Jensen?" She didn't flinch at the name, but her hands stopped moving for a moment. The silence that followed said more than any explanation could. Reynolds spoke softly. "You carry that with you, don't you?" She nodded slowly. "Every day. Some people say snipers have to be cold, detached. But that's not true. You feel everything. Every face, every breath, every silence after the shot. You just learn not to show it." Reynolds understood then what separated her from most soldiers. It wasn't just her skill. It was her heart. The weight she carried quietly, without complaint. He asked gently, "Why keep doing it then? Why keep going out there?" She placed the freshly cleaned barrel on the table and looked at it for a long time before answering. "Because I made a promise. To him, to everyone we lost, that I wouldn't waste what they gave up. Every mission I finish, every life I help save. That's how I keep that promise." Her voice didn't crack, but her eyes said everything. Reynolds felt something shift inside him. For years, he had led men into danger, always believing strength meant shutting emotions out. But sitting across from her, he realized strength wasn't about silence. It was about carrying pain without letting it break you. He leaned back and exhaled. "You know, I used to think medals and missions defined a soldier. But now I think it's the quiet ones, the ones who don't talk about it, that really keep this whole thing standing." Torres gave a small nod. "The quiet ones keep the world balanced, sir. The loud ones just make it spin." That made him laugh softly, the first genuine laugh he'd had in days. They sat there a while longer, the air between them calm and heavy with unspoken respect. He watched as she reassembled the Barrett piece by piece. Her movements were smooth, precise, almost graceful, like muscle memory carved by years of repetition. When she finished, she set the rifle down gently, almost lovingly. "All clean," she said quietly. Reynolds looked at it, then at her. "You know, there are men out there who think they're the best. But none of them could do what you do, not with that kind of calm." She smiled faintly. "Calm is just practice, sir. Everyone shakes the first time they pull the trigger." He tilted his head. "And you? Did you shake?" Her eyes softened. "Yes, I still do sometimes. But now, I know what I'm shaking for." That line stayed with him. "I know what I'm shaking for." It was the most human thing he'd ever heard from a sniper. When he finally stood to leave, the room felt different. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. At the door, he turned back once more. "Torres," he said, "if anyone ever doubts you again, send them to me. I'll tell them what I saw today." She looked up from the rifle and said quietly, "They wouldn't believe you anyway." He smiled. Then they don't deserve to know. As he walked out into the cool night, the stars spread wide across the dark sky. Somewhere out there, he thought, were the ghosts of soldiers who'd never made it home, and one woman who carried their memory with every breath. Inside the armory, Torres sat alone again, the Barrett resting across her lap. She looked down at it, her reflection faintly visible in the dark metal. For the first time in a long while, she let herself smile, just a little, not because she was proud, but because for once someone finally understood. Days passed quietly after the mission. The desert base returned to its usual rhythm. Helicopters landing and leaving, soldiers training, radio chatter filling the air. But something had changed. Everyone in the camp seemed to treat Sergeant Elena Torres differently now. It wasn't fear or distance anymore. It was quiet respect. She didn't talk much, didn't act any different, but her presence carried a weight. The kind that didn't need words. When she walked past, soldiers nodded, not because of rank, but because they knew what she'd done, what she'd lived through. Commander Reynolds noticed it, too. He'd led many missions and seen many kinds of courage, but none like hers. She didn't chase glory or medals. She didn't even seem to care if anyone knew her name. She just did her job, perfectly, every time. One afternoon, Reynolds got a call from HQ. The higher-ups wanted to recognize Torres for her exceptional service. They were preparing a medal ceremony, the kind with speeches, cameras, and reporters. When Reynolds found her in the range, she was already setting up her rifle for practice. "They want to give you an award," he said, leaning against the doorway. She looked up, expression unreadable. "For what?" "For saving 12 lives last week," he said. "For the 3,347-meter shot. For everything you've done." She turned back to her rifle and adjusted the scope. "I don't need a medal for doing my job." Reynolds smiled. "You earned it." Torres shook her head. "I didn't do it alone. Jensen was part of that shot. He deserves it more than I do." Her voice softened at his name. Even after all this time, it still carried a shadow. Reynolds walked closer, lowering his voice. "You think he'd want you to hide in the shadows? You kept his promise. That means something." She was silent for a moment, then finally said, "Maybe, but the best shots are the ones no one talks about." That night, Reynolds thought about her words. He sat alone outside his tent, staring at the stars. He had seen hundreds of soldiers come and go. Loud ones, reckless ones, brave ones, but Torres was different. She carried herself with a kind of peace that came only after surviving the impossible. The next morning, he made a decision. When the day of the ceremony came, Torres stood at the edge of the parade ground, uncomfortable in her clean uniform. She didn't like ceremonies. The noise, the attention, none of it felt real to her. She preferred the silence of the hills, the sound of wind and distant echoes. Reynolds stood beside her, holding a small wooden box. The base commander gave a long speech about courage, precision, and sacrifice. Cameras clicked, soldiers stood at attention, and when Torres's name was called, everyone clapped. She stepped forward quietly, her face calm. The base commander opened the box, revealing a medal shining under the sun. But before he could pin it, Reynolds raised a hand. "Permission to speak, sir?" he said. The commander nodded. Reynolds turned to the crowd. "With respect, I think we're looking at this the wrong way. This medal isn't for one person. It's for every soldier who fought beside her, those who came home and those who didn't." He turned to Torres, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Sergeant Torres doesn't fight for medals. She fights for the promise she made, to never waste what others gave their lives for. That kind of honor can't be pinned to a uniform." The crowd went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Reynolds then took the medal from the box and placed it gently on the table beside her rifle, the same Barrett .50 that had changed everything. "This belongs here," he said quietly, "with the weapon that carried history, not with a person who already carries enough." Torres looked at him, her eyes soft but glistening. For the first time, she didn't hide the emotion in her face. She gave a small nod. "Thank you, sir." After the ceremony ended, The soldiers came one by one to shake her hand. None of them said much, just respect, thank you, or a silent nod, and she nodded back to each one humbly. Later that evening, she went back to the ridge behind the base, the quiet place where she sometimes sat to think. The desert stretched far into the horizon, the sunset painting everything gold and red. She carried the Barrett with her, the metal still resting in its box. When she reached the top, she placed the box beside a small stone she'd set there long ago, the one marked with Jensen's initials. She whispered softly, "They remembered you today." The wind carried her words away. She sat there for a long time, watching the light fade from the sky. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt peaceful, like the valley itself was finally resting. As night settled, she stood up, slung the rifle over her shoulder, and began walking back toward the base. In the distance, she could see the lights glowing faintly, her next mission waiting, her next dawn approaching. Commander Reynolds watched her from afar. He didn't call out, didn't stop her. He just stood there, realizing that some legends don't need stories, and some heroes don't need recognition. They simply keep moving forward, one quiet step at a time. He smiled faintly to himself. "The quiet ones," he murmured, remembering her words. "They really do keep the world balanced." Torres disappeared into the darkness, her figure blending into the night, calm, steady, unstoppable. The kind of soldier history rarely remembers, but the world is safer because she exists.